up beside him. "Desmond. I don't know where I am." He knew the voice before she finished the sentence. It belonged to a woman whose family name was on the cannery, the ferry dock, and the brass plaque outside the hospital's oncology wing, and who, in 8 months of him emptying her waste baskets, had never once asked his last name. "Miss Calloway. Where are you?" "There's a bar. The Baronoff, I think." Everyone left. Her voice cracked, unrecognizable from the cool, unreachable woman he knew through closed office doors. Everyone always leaves. He didn't think. He grabbed his jacket and took the estate's old pickup out into a storm that was throwing rain sideways off Sitka Sound, wipers barely keeping pace, 11 miles of black road between him and a woman he barely knew. The radio kept cutting to static every time the road curved along the water, and he didn't bother fixing it. He wasn't listening to anything but the sound of his own tires losing traction on the turns. Welcome back to Firelight Stories. If you love slow-burn romance, quiet dignity, and stories about people the world walks past until it can't anymore, you're in the right place. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's begin. Vivian Calloway was in a corner booth of the hotel bar, alone, mascara tracked halfway down her face, an empty glass in front of her. The gala she'd been at hours earlier, the one where the board voted to strip her of her late father's tie-breaking share, had ended 2 hours before. Everyone from Calloway Marine Holdings had gone home. Nobody had stayed to make sure the woman who signed their paychecks got home safe. "Miss Calloway. Come on. Let's get you up." She lifted her head slowly, eyes red-rimmed and lost in a way he'd never seen on her. "They took his vote," she mumbled. "My father's been dead 8 months and they already took his vote." Desmond didn't hesitate. He helped her stand, one arm looped over his shoulder, her heels dangling from his other hand. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, once they were moving, forehead against the cold window. "You've never even told me your last name." "Because nobody should be alone when the whole world's caving in on them," he said, hands tight on the wheel against the wind. "Even if I don't know you." "Not really." She was the reason his mother, Adiz, still had a job worth keeping in this town. The Calloway cannery had fed half the fleet houses for 2 decades. He was the reason a marine engineering degree sat half-finished in a drawer, paused the year her illness started. Neither of them said any of that out loud. There wasn't room for it in a truck fighting a storm. By the time they reached the estate, she could barely stand. He got her inside, got her a glass of water she didn't drink, and laid her down on her side on top of the covers, the way you're supposed to for someone who's had too much, so she wouldn't choke in the night. Then he pulled the armchair from the corner of the room over next to the bed and sat down in it, still in his work boots, because he wasn't leaving a half-conscious woman alone in a house on a hill in weather like that. He meant to leave once she was steady. He fell asleep instead, sometime after 4 in the morning. Vivian woke first, just past 7, to grey light and a headache with its own zip code. It took her 10 seconds to register the man asleep in the chair, still in his jacket, his housekeeper's badge still clipped crooked to the pocket. "Desmond. How do you feel?" "I don't remember anything past midnight." She sat up too fast, had to steady herself against the headboard. "Why are you in my room?" "You called me. I brought you home. I stayed to make sure you were breathing right. That's all it was." She looked at the untouched blanket. Then at his boots. Then at the chair, pulled up like a sentry post, not an invitation. And understood exactly what kind of man had been alone with her all night. She believed him. Belief, she would learn within the hour, wasn't the currency this house ran on. By 8, Marta the day housekeeper had seen his truck in the driveway and texted her sister at the Baronoff's front desk, who'd seen Ms. Calloway leave the night before, clearly unwell, with the household help. By 9, the story had reached the harbor, where fishermen mending nets traded it back and forth like weather. None of them had been in the room. All of them knew the shape of the story that was easiest to tell. Desmond felt it the moment he walked into the hardware store for a length of pipe 2 days later. Conversations didn't stop exactly, that would have been too obvious, they just changed shape, drop to register, pick back up in a different key once he'd passed. The man behind the counter, who'd known Desmond since he was 12 and used to ride his bike down for penny candy, rang him up without quite meeting his eyes. "Didn't figure you for that kind of employee," the man said, not unkindly, like he was passing along a piece of weather. "I'm not any kind of employee," Desmond said. "I drove a drunk woman home in a storm so she wouldn't die in a parking lot." "Sure. Sure." The man handed him his change, still not looking at him. "That's what I heard, too." It was the sentence that stayed with Desmond the whole walk home. "That's what I heard, too," as if the truth and the rumor were simply two competing versions of the same weather report, and a man could believe whichever one was more interesting without it costing him anything. It cost Desmond his name in this town twice, once when nobody bothered to learn it, and once when everybody suddenly thought they knew exactly what it stood for. Weston Calloway, Vivian's half-brother from their father's second marriage, and the man currently maneuvering to take control of Calloway Marine Holdings, heard the story by 10 that first morning. He did not look concerned. He looked like a man who'd just been handed exactly what he'd been waiting for. "The housekeeper. In your bedroom. Overnight. The same week you lost Dad's swing vote and got publicly wasted at a company gala." He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "Doesn't matter what happened, Viv. Matters what it looks like. My lawyers are already drafting the wellness petition." "The what?" "A formal request the board place you on mandated leave, for your own well-being, while a temporary steward, me, takes operational control. Not a hostile takeover. An intervention. Everyone will say how brave I am for doing it." What he didn't say, and what Vivian couldn't yet admit even to herself, was that some of his concern wasn't invented. She had missed 2 supplier deadlines since the funeral. She had signed off on a permit renewal a week late, costing the company a fine. Grief had made her sloppy in ways a company this size couldn't always absorb. Weston wasn't wrong that something was slipping. He was simply willing to use a stranger's kindness as the weapon to fix it. Downstairs, Priscilla Vane, one of Weston's Seattle lawyers, cornered Desmond in the mudroom with a leather folder. "I understand you had an eventful night, Mr. Okafor-Reyes." She said his hyphenated name like a mild inconvenience. "I'd advise you think carefully before you say anything publicly, because there's a simpler story available. A generous severance. Relocation assistance. In exchange, a short statement confirming you found Ms. Calloway intoxicated and brought her home, full stop. No mention of the bedroom. You want me to disappear. I want you compensated for discretion." She opened the folder. "Your mother's bills at Sitka Community must be substantial. This would cover them. All of them. Every outstanding balance, paid in full, within the week." Desmond looked at the number typed at the bottom of the page. It was more money than he'd ever seen attached to his own name in one place, more than 2 years of his estate salary combined. He thought of Adi's hands, permanently curled into a half-fist from years of gutting fish on the line, of the specialist in Juneau she'd been putting off seeing because the copay alone was more than she made in a week. "What happens if I say no?" he asked, mostly to see what Priscilla would actually say if he made her say it plainly. "Then the story gets told without your input," she said, not missing a beat. And stories told without input tend to be less generous to the people who decline to shape them. That's a threat. It's an incentive structure. Her smile didn't waver. "I've done this a long time, Mr. Okafor-Reyes. It never ends with the poor employee quietly happy beside the heiress. It ends with her family deciding you were always a liability and you deciding the fight wasn't worth what it cost you. I'm offering you the version where you walk away with something instead of nothing." For a moment he actually considered it, not the money itself, but what the money could buy his mother, who had gutted salmon through 2 of her own surgeries so he could stay in school before he'd had to leave it for her. Adi's had never once asked him to give up that degree. He'd done it because there was no version of the math that let him keep it and keep her alive. "I'm not selling my mother's illness back to you to make your story easier to tell," he said, and closed the folder himself, and walked out. He didn't throw the folder away. He kept it, tucked into the same drawer as his old enrollment forms, and told himself it was because he might need proof of what they'd offered him someday. He wasn't sure yet that was the whole truth. He thought that was the end of it. It was only the beginning. For days later, a video clip surfaced on a local gossip page, 11 seconds of grainy hotel lobby footage, timestamped the night of the gala. It showed Desmond half carrying Vivian toward the exit, and in the moment the camera caught clearest, his hand closing around something small and metallic in hers. The caption, written by an account nobody could trace back to Priscilla but everybody assumed was hers, read, "Housekeeper seen taking Calloway heiress's room key while she's incapacitated." Where did they really spend the night? It wasn't her room key. It was her phone, which had slipped from her hand as she stumbled, and which he'd caught before it hit the marble floor. But the clip didn't show that. The clip showed exactly enough to make people believe whatever they were already inclined to believe. By morning, the story had mutated into something uglier than a rumor about a bedroom. Now it was a story about a poor man taking something from a drunk, powerless woman. The estate's insurer called about liability. 2 board members called Weston directly, not Vivian, to ask whether the household situation needed to be addressed before the shareholders' dinner. The community college where Desmond had once been enrolled quietly flagged his old file pending review, after an anonymous tip questioned his character. His landlord above the hardware store, a normally easygoing man named Otis, stopped him on the stairs that same week and mentioned, almost apologetically, that a couple of other tenants had asked whether it was appropriate to have him in the building anymore. Nothing had been decided, Otis said. It was just something people were asking. Desmond understood exactly what that meant. A rumor didn't have to be proven to start costing you things. It only had to exist long enough for people to start being careful around you, the way you'd be careful around a dog that might or might not bite. Vivian's lawyers, hers, not Weston's, advised her that the fastest way to protect the company, and possibly to protect Desmond from a harassment charge Weston's camp was now threatening to manufacture, was distance. Public, visible distance. She suspended him from the estate payroll that afternoon. She didn't call him first. He heard it from Marta. He stood in the kitchen doorway that evening, jacket still on, and for the first time since the night of the storm, his voice wasn't careful. "You didn't even call me. I didn't have a choice, Desmond. If I don't create separation, they'll turn a fabricated key into a criminal complaint, and it won't just cost you a job. It could cost you everything. So instead it costs me you." He shook his head slowly. "I sat in a chair all night so nobody could say anything happened. And the second they said it anyway, you believed the rumor because believing the truth meant fighting for it, and fighting costs you something too. That's not fair." "Maybe not. But it's what it looks like." He set his estate keys on the counter, gently, the way you set down something you're trying not to break further. "You know what the worst part is? I finally stopped being invisible in this town. And it only took a lie to do it." He walked out into the fog without waiting for her to answer, and for the first time, Vivian understood exactly what it felt like to be the person other powerful people leave behind. That night, in the small house near the cannery, Desmond finally opened the drawer he hadn't touched in over a year and pulled out the marine engineering re-enrollment folder. He didn't fill it out. He sat with it on his lap, the porch light buzzing outside, and didn't hear his mother come in until she was standing in the doorway. Adiz had heard the rumor at the hospital that morning, from a nurse who didn't know whose son she was talking about. "Did they make you feel ashamed for helping somebody?" she asked quietly. "No, Mama." He closed the folder. "They made me tired of proving I'm not what they already decided." She sat beside him on the bed, the way she used to when he was small and the boat schedules kept his father away too long. "When your father died, I promised myself I'd never let this town decide who you were before you got the chance to decide it yourself. And then I got sick, and I let you give up the one thing that was only yours, because I needed you close, and it was easier than telling you to go. You didn't make me do anything, Mama. I chose it. I know. That's what worries me." She took his hand, the fingers permanently curled from 20 years on the cannery line. You've spent your whole life making yourself smaller so nobody would have a reason to take anything else from you. I let you do it because I needed you clothes. I'm not sure I should have. What was I supposed to do? Leave you? No. But you were supposed to still want something for yourself while you stayed. She nodded at the folder. Finish it. Not for her. For the boy who used to talk about boat hulls at the dinner table like they were poetry, before the world taught him to talk quieter about everything he wanted. He didn't finish it that night. But for the first time in a year, he didn't put it away, either. The community college, once the fabricated video's timeline fell apart under scrutiny, quietly cleared his old file without ever issuing an apology for flagging it in the first place. Desmond didn't ask for one. He'd learned by then that some doors only ever open a crack, and you take the crack. He almost didn't go to the dinner. He stood in front of the one good shirt he owned, still on its hanger from his father's funeral 18 years earlier, and told himself there was no version of that room that wanted him in it. He'd spent his whole life being careful about which rooms he walked into uninvited. This was the biggest one in town. But somewhere around 6 o'clock, he thought about the folder still sitting in his kitchen drawer, and about his mother telling him he'd spent his whole life making himself smaller so nobody would have a reason to take anything else from him, and he understood, finally, the difference between staying away out of dignity and staying away out of fear. He'd been telling himself it was the first thing. It had always been the second. He put on the shirt. The stakeholders' dinner, 2 nights later, was the biggest event on the Sitka business calendar. Every cannery owner, every fleet captain, every investor with a stake in Calloway Marine Holdings, gathered in the newly renovated ballroom of the Sound View Lodge overlooking the harbor. Weston had spent for days building toward this room like it was a stage built specifically for him. He didn't wait for dessert. He tapped his glass and stood. Before we vote on interim leadership, this room deserves the full picture of the judgment that's been running this company. His eyes found Vivian near the front. A woman who drank herself unconscious at a company gala. Who let a member of her household staff into her bedroom overnight. Who, when the truth surfaced on video, had to suspend him herself rather than admit what really happened. A murmur rolled through the room. Near the back, Odalise Voss, a shipping broker who'd spent years angling to merge her fleet with Callaway's, and who'd once assumed that merger would come with a marriage to Weston attached, added, loud enough to carry, "Tell them the truth, Vivian. You called the help because there was no one left who'd still answer your calls." Thin, cruel laughter moved through a few tables. Vivian stood. Her hands didn't shake this time. "You're right about one thing, Weston," she said, and the room went quiet at the concession. "I've made mistakes since Dad died. Missed deadlines. Signed things late. Grief made me sloppy, and this company deserves better than sloppy. That part of your concern was never wrong. You didn't invent those problems. I own them." Weston's smile flickered, thrown by the agreement. "But you didn't come here tonight because you're worried about missed permits," she continued. "You came here because a lie about a good man was useful to you, and instead of correcting it, you built a campaign on it. There's a difference between a brother who's genuinely worried about a company and a brother who waits for his sister's worst week to weaponize it. I think everyone in this room already knows which one you've been." She let that sit a moment before continuing. "So here's what I'll do instead of what your lawyer wants me to do." She took a breath. "I will step down from active leadership pending an independent review of my performance, not because of a rumor, but because this company deserves a leader who can prove her judgment with facts, not defend it with silence. But I will not let you use a fabricated video and an innocent man's dignity as the price of my seat." The room went dead silent. Nobody had expected her to offer the one thing Weston actually wanted. It was Weston's turn to look unsteady. "Vivian, that's not. I'm not finished." She reached into her bag and set a folder on the table in front of her, the same folder Priscilla had once offered Desmond in the mudroom, the one he'd handed back to Vivian days ago instead of burning it, because some part of him had known it might matter more than his own comfort. "This is the severance agreement your lawyer offered my housekeeper in exchange for his silence about that night. It's dated the morning after the gala, 3 days before anyone claims to have discovered a stolen room key on video. Ask yourselves why a man would be offered money to disappear before there was supposedly anything to disappear over. The murmur turned sharp, turned toward Weston. That was when the ballroom doors opened. He walked in with the folder from his kitchen table tucked under his arm, the same one Priscilla had once offered him, the one he'd decided that morning belonged in this room more than it belonged in his drawer. Every head turned as he walked to the front, past Weston, past Priscilla's frozen expression, and stopped beside Vivian. "I never wanted her money," he said, his voice steady in a room that had spent a week deciding what kind of man he was without ever asking him. "I wanted the truth to cost the powerful as much as lies cost people like me. That video didn't show a stolen key. It showed a phone falling out of a drunk woman's hand and a man catching it before it broke. I know, because I was the man." He set the folder down beside Vivian's. "This is the offer I turned down for days before anyone claims to have found something incriminating on that footage. I didn't sign it because I wasn't willing to trade my mother's illness for your silence about a night I have nothing to be ashamed of." He turned, briefly, toward Weston. "You had a real concern about how this company's been run since your father died. You might have even been right about some of it. But you didn't build a case. You built a lie, and you were willing to let it cost my mother her son's reputation and my own future to win a vote." Then, quietly, he turned to leave. He hadn't come for applause. He'd come to say it once, clearly, and go home. "Wait." The voice that stopped him wasn't Vivian's, though hers came a half-second after. It was Corinne Calloway, Vivian's grandmother, 81, rarely seen in public since her son's funeral, standing in the doorway on the arm of her driver, her cane striking the floor once, twice, silencing the room more completely than any word could have. "I heard there was a man in this town about to be erased twice in 1 week," she said, moving slowly to the front. "Once by a lie, and once by his own good manners. I wasn't going to let either happen while I still have breath." She stopped beside Desmond and laid a weathered hand on his arm. "I've known his mother 15 years. Adiz Okafor gutted fish through 2 surgeries so her son could stay in school, and he gave up that school so she could stay alive. He gave up a night's sleep to keep my granddaughter from dying alone in a parking lot while every one of you went home to bed." Her gaze swept the room. "You built your fortunes on people exactly like him. Don't you dare use one act of decency as a reason to hand this company to a man who's never sat up all night for anybody but himself." She turned, more slowly now, toward the tables of investors who'd laughed 20 minutes earlier. "I watched most of your fathers build their boats and their businesses on the same harbor his family has worked for 2 generations. Not one of you thought to ask his name before tonight. Ask yourselves what that says about the company you're all so eager to protect." Weston's face had gone pale. Nobody was looking at him anymore. Somewhere near the back, Odalise Voss set down her wine glass and didn't pick it up again for the rest of the evening. "Miss Calloway," Desmond said quietly, to Vivian, "not the room, you don't have to step down." "Not because of me." "I'm not doing it because of you," she said. "I'm doing it because you were right. I let the fear of a rumor decide what I believe before I let the truth. I don't want to run a company on that kind of leadership anymore. I want to earn the trust back, and I want to do it in the open, where you can watch me do it." The applause that followed wasn't for Weston, and it wasn't only for Vivian. It was for the man standing quietly beside her, finally named, finally witnessed, in the same room that had spent a week treating him as disposable. Vivian found him afterward on the lodge's back deck, alone, the fog rolling low over the harbor. "You should be proud," he said. "You didn't back down in there. I'm tired, Desmond. Tired of every good thing in my life turning into ammunition. I know something about that." She looked over at him. "I'm sorry I suspended you before I even called. I know why you did it. Doesn't mean it didn't hurt." He kept his eyes on the water. "For about 3 days I told myself I finally understood exactly where I stood with you. Convenient when the truck needed driving. Optional the moment it got expensive to keep me around. That's not fair. Maybe not. But it's how it felt." He let out a breath. I sat with that folder Priscilla gave me for a long time before I decided to hand it back to you instead of burning it. Some part of me wanted proof, I think. In case I ever needed to remind myself I didn't imagine any of this. You didn't imagine it, Vivian said quietly. I've replayed that morning 100 times since. The chair, the water glass you didn't make me drink, the way you didn't touch a single thing in that room that wasn't yours to touch. I knew what kind of man you were before anyone else opened their mouth about it. I just let the fear of losing the company make me act like I didn't. Why? Because losing the company felt survivable. I've lost things before. Losing you felt like something I hadn't practiced for yet. She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. I don't know what I am to you. I just know I don't want you managed off my payroll to make things simpler for everyone else. Then don't hire me back, Desmond said. Let me finish the degree instead. Whatever this is between us, I don't want it built on a paycheck you sign. She smiled, eyes wet, and understood he'd just answered a question about them neither one had said out loud yet.